Hello and welcome to the Dark Side with me, Tabitha Purple, and TC Storm will join us shortly. Here to do your news intro before we get started. Thank you so much to everyone who gives us feedback and interacts. We are so happy that you're with us and that you join in the discussion. Please do remember to put your comments in the comments section, and then we're able to respond, to have you participate. We really enjoy that. So as always, we start the show with our news stories for the week. There are some shocking. There are some really big news stories out this week that continue to follow on with the patterns of what we're seeing in the world, tragically. And so if there is anything you'd like us to cover in future topics, please do just pop that in the comments section. But for now, we will begin with the news. And the first news item is a news item out of the Netherlands in Europe. It is about the Dutch Central Bank, and it basically tells us that the Dutch Central Bank was closely involved with colonial slavery. There has recently been a study done, and it says that from the foundation of the bank in 1814 until the abolition of slavery in 1863, it was entirely involved in the process. Now, it says that the founding people got their money from plantation slavery. It says that some of the founders were the children of plantation owners, and that's how they were managed to get the money. And they were intensely involved in the horrible history of slavery. Now, it goes on to say that, in fact, it's really hit the bank really quite hard that this came out, because it turns out not only were they involved in the making money from this, but they were also influencing legislation. They were putting pressure on to keep slavery going. They were involved in anti-abolitionist work. So there was, of course, anti-slavery work, the abolitionists, but then there were anti-abolitionists, and the Dutch Central Bank were one of those. It says now that basically the bank is not apologizing yet, and the reason for that is that they wanted to actually go through and really take stock of what they needed to apologize for. But this is on the backdrop of the Bank of England in 2020 had to issue an apology for its past colonial history and its involvement in the slave trade. It was founded in 1694 and said, although it was not directly involved. This was my favorite thing about this. So the British Bank said, we weren't directly involved in slavery, but all of the people that ran our bank during the time that slavery happened were all involved in slavery. We've had to take out all of our founders' pictures out because they were all involved in slavery. But we weren't directly, as a bank, involved in slavery, just the people that worked there. So this was that's an interesting way of putting that. So that's the Bank of England, but also, of course, in the Netherlands, Amsterdam and Rotterdam within the last year have also apologized as cities for their slave past, and Dutch banks such as ABN AMRO and Inslinger Gislen, who are legal officers, have also commissioned their own investigations to look at their own past and to see whether or not they were involved in slavery. I don't even know why these people apologize. They're not trying to make anything better. I don't understand what the point of an apology is, because you're going to apologize as an acknowledgement, as a first. I assume that what you mean is it is a first step, or you just think that that's the band-aid that fixes it. What I find to be really at this point frustrating is that we keep hearing all these apologies, but nothing changes. There is no repairing of the wounds that you have done to multiple countries, to multiple generations of people, to millions of people across the globe have been impacted by your disgusting behavior. And what you think is normal is that you just get to say sorry and then it all goes away. If this was a person we were talking about who had committed the criminal act of enslaving somebody, they would be imprisoned and they would have to make restitution for that to society. But yet still institutions get to say, oh yes, my goodness, this is terrible news that we were we were involved in slavery and we advocated for this to continue. We're really sorry. Okay, so what? I don't understand what the point of the apology is at this point, but that's because of the rest of the news stories, I think, as well. Mr. Storm, welcome to today's show.
Yeah, instead of a coffee, I've opted for a hot chocolate.
You're up for something sweet on this horrible news that I'm bringing.
Look, just to follow on from what you were saying about apologies and moving on, and how there's a real desire to move on, or there's the expectation I've said sorry, so now we can just move past it. I mean, just imagine, right? Just throw this out here. Just imagine, say, you were a black professional footballer, and let's just say you had like kicked your cat,
For example.
and yeah, just for example, and then you turn around and you said, I'm
So
sorry, it's wrong, I shouldn't have done it. You know, we should be able to just move on, right? I mean, nobody should be calling for you to lose your job or go
job,
to jail, or no,
mhm.
nothing like that, right?
Investigations by national organizations. No, none of that. Yeah, the startling contrast between the two is quite funny. I've just seen Daniel's comment for today. Just a quick reminder that, chocolate and coffee were part of the slave trade. I'm just going
Yeah,
to leave that there.
right. And one other thing on the Bank of England before we move on is
Yes.
that it is disingenuous, their approach to this, to say, hey, we weren't involved in the slave trade. One of the main reasons you came into being and were founded was to ensure the ships that were carrying slaves.
Listen, I
Right?
yeah.
So, yeah, we had nothing to do with slave trade. We were just
We didn't
ensuring
we didn't transport
the
anybody, so
trip,
we can't be
the
held
ships that were
responsible.
transporting them.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, for me, the Dutch Central Bank, the Bank of England, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, at this point, it doesn't matter who apologizes, colonialism is alive and well. Um, and that leads us to our next story for today. So, um, does anyone know the Chagos? I hope I say this right. The Chagos Islands, off of
Mhm.
Mauritius, off the coast of Mauritius. Beautiful islands, sometimes known as the Solomon Islands, depending on where you are from and how you get to know the island. So I just want to read a little bit of history on this because basically, as I understand it, in 1972, and this is from an eyewitness account who's actually finally being allowed to return to her home. So in 1972, so for some people who watch this within your lifetime, Rosamund Bratteen was only 17 years old when British officials arrived on Solomon Atoll, and everyone was ordered to gather at the manager's office on the coconut plantation. She does not remember any advance warning, but what she does remember is they were immediately told by the British Indian Ocean Territory that they had to leave their homes because Americans were coming to use the Chagos Archipelago to set up a military base. So, in short, what happens is the British decide that the Chagos Islands, which are nowhere near anywhere of Britain, in 1972 belong to them. So, in our lifetime, in some, not mine, but in other people's lifetime, they go down there, they decide it belongs to them. And to add insult to injury, not only do they take all the people off the islands, but what they then do is they give it to someone else. They don't, it's not like they used it, they gave it to the Americans to use as a military base. It says that, and on the note of kicking cats, of course, it says that all of the people were transported on ships without any kind of comfort, whatever. They were just shoved on a ship, taken off. Half of them, so they were just split up. Half went to Mauritius and half went to a neighboring island. And it's reported that what they did is because, of course, they had to leave their precious animals and pets and farm animals, and the British people just went in and shot them all, killed all of them. And then the people of these islands were not allowed to return until 2022. This year. They've been able to return for heritage visits. What does that mean? It means that they were allowed to take a trip while being supervised by army officials so that they could visit their homeland, and they were only allowed to go where those officials allowed them to go, and then they were transported right back to their home. And that was only twice. So this young lady had only been able to go twice. She was just a visitor and she was basically kicked off. And so this is her first visit. It's her first travel to her home in which she's not being escorted by military officers and told she's not welcome there and she's a visitor. And this is for all of the people. Of course, this is just one woman's story out of all of it. What's interesting, of course, is that this has been at the UN tribunals, and in 2021, last year. So we're still talking about colonialism is so far away, and we're not colonial in the same ways, but somehow this is still happening within this last year. So last year, the tribunal, the International Tribunal for the Law at Sea, and on the 28th of January, found that the UK had no sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, and saying that all previous rulings by the International Court of Justice had legal effect, and that they needed to complete the process of decolonializing this, and had not. Last year, January, this happened. This, like, we're talking about Britain still having colonial power in a place that they don't own, refusing international courts of justice law to return it to the people. They're refusing to allow the people to have their land back, to have their home back, to have their island back, and still having the nerve enough. And the reason that this all is, of course, coming out is because they wanted more power in the UN, and they were being denied it on the basis that you aren't even keeping international law yourself, but you want to come and be in a position to moderate international law for other people. I don't think so. Well, at least the UN said that at the very least. But this has been to the courts 3 times now. So it was the twice for the actual international court rulings, and then it had to go back to the international tribunals because they still hadn't returned it up until last year. That's the first time is this year, within the last week, that these people are allowed to go back to their home. We're talking about colonialism. I mean, honestly, it drives me insane.
Look, there's a few things on this. The current British government, nobody really expects them to respect international law. I mean, they negotiated a treaty with the EU and then just turn around and break it.
I mean, honestly.
And that they knowingly broke it and have said, we will break it again.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, look, I have a way to resolve the whole problem with the Chagos Islands, right? What we do is we get together and we tell the British public that a footballer went over there and kicked the cat.
You just didn't do that. Oh my Lord, help me. Please, God, help me. Please,
Listen,
God.
If we tell them that this is all about kicking a cat.
British footballer, you said that right. You have to just make sure.
No, he's actually French.
French,
right?
British, but that's even better.
No, he's a black French. Nothing to do with Britain.
Yes, that's even. Yes, but that's even
okay.
better.
So all we have to do is go tell the British people that a footballer kicked the cat, and you see how they lose their mind, right? That's all you have to do to resolve the problem. And I think the other thing that this speaks to is that there is a real fear amongst British people that they understand and they know about all these bloody foreigners coming over here and taking our homes, because they've been doing it and they're still doing it
within our life. Like,
yes,
I know people want to talk about, slavery was so long ago, colonialism is over, we're living in modern. What are you talking about? In what world? Because these people are basically bound up in, they're living outside of cultures that they don't belong. They were just shipped off to a place, dumped on the side of the road, left there to just to suffer while they could just see that they could go back to their home. No, their homes was taken from them, their land was taken from them, their livelihoods were taken from them. And you know, that doesn't even account for what the reports talk about is the horrors that went on before to starve the people off the island. They stopped
Yeah.
transporting things. They stopped. I mean, these people, the British people did. Oh, it's horrible. It's evil what was done to these people. Not even for, I mean, I don't think there's a good reason. But then you turn around and gave it to the Americans for a military base. Are you actually kidding me? What what kind of mess is that? Well, the Americans need a military base off the coast of Mauritius for. They don't. There is no reason. Your country is quay on the other side. Stay on your own country. Honest to my, I just and Daniel's right. The animals might get more justice, because the fact that they actually had to put the animals in there as if they needed to elicit tears from people over the animals, and not the fact
I
that
told you, tell him a footballer kicked the cat.
Anyway, this one upsets me. It really does upset. It was quite upsetting to read, and just every story that you read about it, and the stomach churning nature with which Britain is dealing with these people. And of course, trying to now pretend, oh, but we need to keep it for conservation reasons. I would leave the people alone.
I'm sorry. Is this the same
it.
British people that are messing up their own country want to talk to another country about conservation? Come out of here. Come on.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's mess. It is absolutely mess. Am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised. Am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised. I'm annoyed. I'm not surprised. I'm frustrated. Do you know what it is? It's because you hear so frequently in stories that everything is in the past. And when we're talking about this, these people are being allowed to return to their island, which has been decimated by the Americans and by the British, being completely destroyed, and they're now being allowed to return because of the UN legal international courts have said twice, and now a tribunal the third time has told them, you need to give the people back their island. How dare you take the people's island? Like, really, is it that simple? I'm not surprised. I'm just annoyed. I think that's more accurate. So on my annoyed status, let's up it a little bit. Breaking news today, literally today, just came in, Sunday the 13th. Radical action needed to tackle racial health inequality in the NHS, says damning report. So, good news for British people. Great news for British people. And if you're a British person of colour, really, you'll feel so overjoyed at this news. The National Health Service, which is the service that runs, for those of you who are not from Britain, the entire medical services of the UK in its varying parts, but the National Health Service basically, and I will quote, racism, racial discrimination, barriers to access in healthcare, and woeful ethnicity data collection have never negatively impacted the health of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people in England for years, according to the review commissioned by the NHS Race and Health Observatory, which reveals the true scale of health inequalities faced by ethnic minorities for the first time. Ethnic inequalities in health outcomes are evident at every stage throughout the life course, from birth to death, says the review, and it's largest of its kind. Yet, despite clear, convincing, and persistent evidence that ethnic minorities are being failed, and repeated pledges of action with no significant changes have yet to be made in the NHS. Apparently, the 166-page document is due to be published this week. We could just add this to the number of institutions that have been found to be institutionally racist within England. And I'll say England because it's a report on England. I must caveat that. So news out of the UK, but it's from England. Why? To whom is this breaking news? Oh, the report's only just been released. It's not breaking news to all of us who have been on the receiving end. I mean, we can tell you, Mr. Storm and I, of stories that we heard of just over the last 2 months of women of color, particularly, who have been completely and utterly failed. Unfortunately, some instances have left to the death of those people, some almost death of those people, and the effects felt within the community, families, etc., of a failed system for, particularly in these cases that we know of, Black women of color, is shocking, and just it disturbs you in your tummy. So it's not breaking news to all of us who live in our communities and who wear our faces and go into these health practices to understand that it is discriminatory. I mean, I can tell you my experiences of the birthing system to say that we had some issues, is putting it politely. But I think what it is that we have new reports being released that keep uncovering the same information that we already know, which is that police, schools, health, every kind of institution within the UK, within England, is institutionally racist, misogynistic, etc. And it all stays pretty much the same. Nothing changes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just a quick aside to this, because you're talking about the institutions that are racist and misogynistic. Cressida the Dick is gone. We can all have a party.
Yes.
They're going to bring in another racist, misogynistic.
I was going to say, I'm not sure
Kerry Waterman.
we might be better than we know at this point.
What's that?
I said it might be better the devil you know in some cases.
You know what? To be honest, could it really get much worse?
No, not under her watch particularly, I think. I think the only time it got worse was if you then went back to kind of Brixton riots, Tottenham riots, times like that, when obviously she wasn't in charge, but those were probably worse times in terms of who was policing.
You're pretty much there now, you know.
Well, that's my point. Is it those? So you're not going to get any worse, like we had, the different thing.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just a quick aside. In terms of the health aspect, I am not surprised by this. I have some friends that work within the health profession, and I was on their page on Facebook not too long ago, arguing with people from the health profession who were trying to tell me that the NHS was not racist. Look, I'm like, okay.
Why is it? So there's, I mean, I think this would be a genuine question for everybody who watches this for the dark side. It's almost as if the acts that are perpetrated under racist institutions are not nearly as harmful as the label of racism to these individuals. Like, people are dying because of the racism that you are perpetrating, because of the institutional racism that exists. And the title institutional racism is more offensive than the fact that people are dying.
Because I'm not a cat.
You're not going to let this cat story go.
I'm just saying. I find the whole thing.
I find it offensive, but anyway, there you go. That's me. So, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Storm wanted us to cover a story that broke in the UK over last weekend, I think it was. A footballer, French footballer, who is playing for West Ham, put up a Instagram video or a TikTok video where he allegedly kicked his cat. And by the Monday morning, like, the whole world was up in arms. How could he do this deplorable thing? It was a news story on the BBC, how disgusting it was. People were calling for the man to have his job taken away for him. They were calling for his job to be taken. They were calling for him to be put in prison. And yet still the news stories that broke the week before over the violence against women, they didn't make BBC News breakfast. I didn't hear any stories really about the violence against women, but a cat, I mean, yeah, that made big news. So there you go.
I think
Anyway,
look, well, for me, this is it. Look, the man kicked the cat. He shouldn't have done it. It's appalling behavior. There's no two ways about it. For me, the issue, and as Daniel says, they care more about the kitty than they do people. So the footballer has lost sponsorship from
yep,
Adidas.
yep.
Okay. His
He's had the
football club,
cats taken away.
right? He had the cats taken away, yes. But look, he should have had the cats taken away, to be honest. But the football club he plays for lost sponsors because of this. And here is the real question, because now you have set the standard. Next time a footballer is accused of racism, are you going to stop sponsoring them?
No, they never do.
Right?
They
Next
don't
time
stop
they're accused
sponsoring.
of a criminal act, are you going to stop sponsoring them?
The next time we get an
Are you
accusation
going to
of
stop
violence against
sponsoring the
women,
football club? No, because
no,
I'm pretty sure
over a cat.
uh, Cristiano Ronaldo was
Oh,
facing rape allegations in the States,
mm-hmm.
right? I'm sorry, but his sponsors haven't pulled away from him yet.
And the teams haven't either, and no one else has.
We have John Terry and Anton Ferdinand. No sponsors pulled away from Chelsea or John Terry in all of this. So it really does appear as though there is more concern for the cat than there is for people.
Well, on that note, news stories are over. We're going to kick into our subject for today, which I see a lot of you have tuned in for: purity culture and parenting, and the intersection that we have between the two. This came up because a good friend of ours posted a quotation, posted a piece of
As a
parenting
meme,
advice. It was a
was a meme.
meme. It was some parenting advice meme
Do
information.
you have a copy of the image?
I don't have a copy of the image. I wanted to share it. I've been looking for it for ages and I couldn't find it because he promptly took it down again because he refused to have anything to do with it. What can I say? We have good friends who have good taste. So it was shared. The image itself was of a child sitting on a parent's lap. So this way. So as you'd be hugging your child, so they're sitting wrapped around your lap. The content that followed underneath sexualized that kind of a hold. You know, lift up your kid or they sit on your lap and they're doing whatever over your shoulder. And then underneath it gave all of these instructions to parents or advice that you should follow. If you were a good parent, you should not let your child sit on anyone's lap ever. There is no reason for that. They're never allowed, especially on their uncles. You mustn't ever dress or be naked in front of your child after the age of 2. There is no reason for nudity in front of a child after the age of 2. They must never see your body. You mustn't trust any family members. So on and so forth went the advice in the meme. It was horrendous, pretty much. We called up immediately and were like, did you read what you posted? Yeah, you sure you want to have that down? And after a quick conversation, it was removed because it was really horrendous. What was really scary is that a lot of people were agreeing with it and were saying, yes, this is good advice, you know. Make sure your children know and understand that they must not have these interactions with adults. Make sure they never go anywhere near adults. Make sure they're never alone with men. Make sure they never sit on their uncle's laps. Make sure nothing ever, you know. And in the end, the long and the short of it was the overriding message is that the responsibility for the criminal actions of adults was placed upon the child. Children must avoid contact. Children must never be seen to wear anything. Children must avoid the sitting on a lap. Children are the ones who are responsible for the actions of criminal adults. And the parents were left in the, well, we told you not to do that. That's not an appropriate, we're teaching you the boundaries, and that's not an appropriate behavior. And the perpetrator was left to just prey on whoever they would choose, because they were left completely unchecked. It was really disturbing because there's a conversation that clearly needs to happen surrounding who is responsible for adults' criminal behavior. If you are an adult and you are objectifying, sexually abusing, preying on children, the whole community needs to come out and deal with you. Everybody needs to let you know that jail is the best place and safest place that you can be, because you should not be around children. But instead, the impression is given that they're still allowed at the family functions. They're still allowed at the family barbecue. They're still allowed to come out to things, because the people that have to then safeguard isn't the parents, but it is the child. The child is responsible, much in the same way that purity culture says that men are not responsible for their thoughts. It is women who are responsible. Was that a good summation for you of the information?
Yeah, yeah. It's fairly good. As I said, I wish we had the meme because there were
A number of
all-
awful points.
yeah, there were a
Yeah.
real number of awful points to it. Um, I don't even know where to begin with this.
Well, I think let's do some quick terms of explanation. I think one is, what is purity culture? I think that needs to be explained. The impact it has on wider society. Purity culture isn't just in its origins and stays within its realm. So purity culture refers to a type of Christian culture,
It's a subculture of Christianity.
subculture of Christianity, stemming mainly from the evangelical thread of Christianity out in the States, but it is far more wide-reaching than that, as you will hear from some of the things that we'll be talking about. In fact, I have books from said purity culture authors sitting at the bottom of my bookshelf. Haven't ironically I have them down there just as a reminder that I've come a long way from what was given to me as a young person. But it is a way of existing that ensures that women are controlled, that girls, particularly the emphasis is on girls and their virginity and their purity, and keeping that purity until you're married, and ensuring that everything that you do for your husband after that ensures that he is sexually satisfied, and that he has no reason to do anything like stray or porn or whatever, because he can find all of his sexual needs fulfilled in you because you were pure going in. Does that really give a rough idea of what we're talking about when we talk about purity culture?
Yeah, I mean that. As I said, I think that's yeah, it's a cliff note.
Cliff note
Because
version.
there's a fair amount of history to it. But we were having the conversation, and I said to you that I think what we're dealing with now is purity culture for the digital age and how it has changed slightly.
Hmm.
In terms of before, the purity culture evangelists would seek to justify their position using biblical texts.
Yeah,
You
indeed.
know, you are not your body is not yours; it's your husband's, etc., etc.,
Mhm,
etc., etc.,
mhm,
etc.,
mhm,
etc. But what we're dealing with now in the digital age is people who promote purity culture are found on places like TikTok, YouTube, and they have millions of followers and their videos get millions of views. but they're no longer using biblical scripture as a basis
Mm,
for their position.
mm,
What they are doing is saying, um, because I made the choice of abstaining,
mhm.
the lifestyle you see me with now in these videos where I'm married and I have a nice house and I own businesses and I've got the 2 children and this perfect lifestyle that you see me living is all a result of that choice. And you can have this lifestyle too
Yeah,
if you make the same choices that I did.
yeah.
And for me, as I said, I see this as an amalgamation of um, two of the most dangerous and insidious beliefs to come out of Christianity in modern times because it's purity culture mixed with the prosperity message. And
Right.
because a lot of the time, what these people are doing is they're selling a dream
Mhm,
and they're selling products
mhm,
in their videos.
mhm.
So they'd be selling things like essential oils, and they're saying to people, "Oh, these things will help you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're good for you, whatever, whatever. They help you relax if you're having your urges, et cetera. Just take
Yeah.
a sniff of this, And so they're getting rich off of people, but what they're selling people is the idea that you can get rich, you can
Mhm,
gain wealth
mhm.
if you abstain.
Well, and it's not just people, it's girls.
It's mainly targeted at girls, yes.
Yeah, boys are not
Yeah,
encouraged to abstain in the same way that women are encouraged to abstain. Women, the purity aspect is really heavily placed on women being pure, and women, meeting purity standards, meeting those, yeah, meeting those purity standards. I don't know another way to say that really. While men are not given the same, yeah, it's nice if you don't have sex. You should be consider striving to be a virgin, but
yeah,
yeah, not the
and
same.
so my question would be to anyone who is watching these videos and taking an interest in them,
Mm,
how did following the rules work out for Joshua Harris?
yeah. Well, the thing is,
Well, I think it's important just to explain who Joshua Harris is.
I got the book down there. You want me to grab it?
You can grab it, you can show people the book if you want. But Joshua Harris is an author who wrote the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And it's one
And
of
other
the
books.
hmm? And other
And
books, yeah.
other books.
Yeah. But that book specifically is one of the cornerstones for the explosion of purity culture in the 90s.
Mhm, mhm.
And suffice it to say that Joshua Harris today is divorced
Well, he's
and is
no
a,
longer even a Christian, is he?
and he's no longer a Christian.
Right? Yeah.
So, how did following the rules work out for Joshua Harris?
He didn't. And it didn't work out for the millions of people that followed the rules either. In fact, it was incredibly traumatic, and there are whole books now and
Mhm.
studies dedicated to the women that were left in the wake of the purity culture, and particularly in the wake of that book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Yeah.
Um, I think, this is one of the things I will really say about purity culture that I find quite interesting is the different forms it takes around the world. Because I think I had um, I Kissed Dating Goodbye when it was released originally. So I had that book as a teenager. And I read it and I thought, oh, okay, sure. And just moved on. I didn't really think too much of it. But I wasn't being fed a whole heap of media around it where I had to get a purity ring, where I had to have a ceremony where I was basically married to my dad. It seemed like, he gave me this ring and he's going to hold that ring on my finger until my husband puts a ring on my finger and blah, 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 blah. And that intensity with which it affected Americans is very different to, say, a British person, or a person from another part of the world. Although we had the books, it didn't affect us necessarily in the sense it did affect people, but not at the magnitude with which it decimated evangelical women, I think, in the United States. It illustrates the patriarchal bias in his theology. Patriarchal is to put that politely. I think you can put in that politely. Heretically patriarchal. This is headship theology gone. It's on speed. And I think that people, if you're not from a Christian background, some of these terms may not make sense to you. But what we're talking about in broad terms, you will recognize the influence of that in your own culture. For example, there are songs within music industries like you can't marry a woman that sleeps with more people. You can't make a wife out of that kind of woman. You have to wife women that are pure. Even though these people who are saying these things may not come from Christian backgrounds or may not think about God in the same way, that's how far-reaching purity culture goes, that there is this idea within society that a woman's worth is based on her vagina. I mean, it just it's absolutely insane, to be quite honest.
Yeah. So during the pandemic,
Yes.
On TikTok, people were taking the purity test, and this went viral. And within 24 hours, more than 1.5 million people had taken the test. Absolutely, Daniel. Absolutely. Yeah. So within 24 hours, more than 1.5 million people had taken the test. And even now, if you search TikTok for the rice purity test, there are different purity tests out there, but the rice purity test is one. You will get a return of videos that have accumulated between them over 180 million views.
I had a quick look as you told me about it, and I thought, "There's a what now? A who? There's a test." So I had a quick look on TikTok, and I quickly waved the white flag and walked away. I couldn't get past more than a few videos. I was like, scroll up, scroll up. Nope, I can't do any more. I have too many questions about this purity test to even engage with the craziness that is TikTok on this issue.
Yeah. So in November
Mhm.
of 2021, because gotta bear in mind we're in 2022, there was a pastor on TikTok and he made a video that went viral. And in it, he says, dating, this is a direct quote, dating, the word is not in the Bible, but the concept of what we call dating is honestly practicing divorce, end quote.
He's
Okay,
putting
now
what now?
that's a nonsensical statement. However, I want to give you a quote from Joshua Harris's book to understand that we're still dealing with the same thing. Because Joshua Harris in his book I Kiss Dating Goodbye says, quote, try looking up dating in your Bible's concordance. You won't get very far. And you can find that on page 23 of his book.
Mhm.
So you can see we're dealing with many of the same underlying principles, although it manifests itself slightly differently,
Mhm.
or how it's being taught is slightly different in the
Yeah.
digital age. But I think whatever shape, or form it takes, it is inherently dangerous.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that so many women have already bought into this nonsense without
Mhm.
understanding the dangers that it brings with it. And so I was taking a look at some scholarly articles.
Mhm.
People have done some research on the subject
Mhm.
and written some papers on the subject. And they were talking about there are themes that run through all of the books, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
misogyny, victim blaming,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, justification of violence,
Mhm.
all sorts of things like this went through the books. So I'm going to tell you about one of the books. It's called Real Marriage: The Truth About Sex, Friendship, and Life Together,
Oh dear.
uh, by Driscoll and Driscoll, and it was
Oh
published in 2012.
God.
Okay, so it's not that long ago. And in this book, it clearly states that a woman who does not want to have sex with her husband
Mhm.
should have sex with him anyway.
Mhm.
And if she doesn't,
Mhm.
she's being selfish.
Yep. Indeed. Yep. That is
Okay.
the book. That is what it says. Mhm.
Now, this same said person then goes on to um, talk about a sexual assault that was perpetrated on her,
Mhm.
and she conflates this with consensual premarital sex. She does not see any difference between the two, or at the very least, makes no distinction in her writing between the two. That is dangerous, but it shows just how far many women have gone with the Kool-Aid on this subject.
Well, it's internalized, and I think that that's something that has to be accounted for. The internalization of the responsibility that women are taking, the misogynistic ideas of women being responsible for um, men's behavior internalizes that and makes it real, which is why a lot of women, it takes a long time for them to even recognize themselves that they were raped. They don't recognize it. What's the how do you not know you were raped? Of course you would know you were raped. I mean, rape is like you didn't want to have sex and this person forced you to have sex. This is basic definition. No? Well, the amount of times that that happens in real life and the internalized misogynistic purity culture crap that is put upon women means that that's not as easy to spot as you'd think, because the pressure that is on women, and when you're saying no, your no is not respected and it's walked straight over. And therefore, for you as the victim to even identify, oh, this isn't, I didn't, I didn't actually agree to any of this. And somehow I'm doing all of this. And that's how did I get here? This is me being a bad person. That's the immediate thing. The thing is, not the other person pressured me and was abusing me and was not listening to me and was going over my boundaries. No, no, no. I did a terrible thing. Oh no, I should have been able to say no. And that internalized misogyny that you have to process and deal with as a woman is, thanks to purity culture, if you're a Christian, is astronomical.
Well, I think to explain how purity culture does that is that purity culture pretty much says that men are animalistic, they're savage, and they can't control their urges and their desires. And so it is now incumbent upon women to do that.
Yep. We have to
So
dress better.
when a woman is raped, and you see this often, not just from the women themselves, but from community, what was she wearing?
Yeah.
Because purity culture teaches women you have to dress a certain way in order to help a man control his urges so that he doesn't lust, so that he doesn't find you attractive. And all of that responsibility is placed upon the women instead of teaching men no means no. Look, you need to have control, you need to have responsibility for yourselves. So you have all of that responsibility placed upon the women to take
Mm,
responsibility for
mm,
the actions of men.
mhm.
The problem, or another problem with this, and where it becomes dangerous, is that purity culture has taught women that you are not yours. Your body, you don't have autonomy over your own body. So your father is responsible for you until you get married. Okay. So one man is responsible for you until he can make you another man's responsibility.
Mhm.
The problem with that is that we've just been talking about the fact that purity culture does not teach men the concept of responsibility and self accountability and self responsibility.
Yeah.
Because whose responsibility is it to ensure that they control themselves and don't have desires and urges?
And this is where parenting, this is where this intersectionality between parenting and purity culture really, the rubber meets the road, is often in the masculine form for a dad. How
Mhm.
are you going to parent your daughter in a healthy way that she is raised to believe in herself, to be able to say no to people, to stand up for herself, if what you're saying and what you've always been taught is it's all her fault anyway?
Yeah.
What kind of parent are you going to what kind of parenting are you going to give that little girl? You're gonna tell her, You don't dress like that in my household. You don't go out of the house late. You don't talk to boys. You don't do." All we're gonna do is give her a list of things that you were that make her responsible for the boys around her behavior and her uncle's behavior and her everyone's behavior, and make her feel less than. So by the time she gets to the said other man that you're supposedly handing her over to, supposedly that he will take responsibility, you've already broken this woman. You've already made her less than who she is, because all you have done is tell her that everything is her fault. And we see that. We talked earlier about, I think it was TI that used to take his daughter to the
Mm.
gynecologist to have purity checks. We've talked about fathers who take their daughters regularly to the gynecologist to be checked to make sure that they haven't done anything, and they would like to talk to the doctor and be in the room and blah 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 blah. Because this is going to help your daughter have good self-esteem and feel great about herself. Exactly how?
But but she's not meant to. You see, one of the other things that purity culture does is that it teaches women that they are property or objects. And you often see that in the examples that they give to try and teach or to get across their concept or their ideas about purity.
Mm,
Because what they will say is, you know, it's like a cake, or it's like the petals of a flower.
mm,
You know, you're not a object, you're not property in that way. Where you're told, if you let someone take a bite out of the cake, well, who's going to want the cake?
Once you've crumpled up the piece, I mean, this was always the classic. If you crumple up a piece of paper and then you pull it open, look, a piece of paper is never going to be a flat piece of paper again.
That's a
If you
lie,
pull
because you can
up
iron
the
that piece of paper and it'll be nice and flat. Yeah.
if you crumple up the rose, look how it's destroyed, then you can never have that back and you are
It's
just
called
destroyed.
potpourri.
But the thing is, and this is where it really gets quite scary. particularly for the testimonials that will have come out in the studies for women, is that for a lot of women, what changes between not having sex and sex? So marriage somehow makes sex okay. Well, you've been telling me my whole life, once I have sex, I'm destroyed and ruined and I'm never going to be the same and I won't be whole. So the minute I have sex, doesn't matter what the context is, my body is geared to know that I'm now nothing. And it doesn't matter on context. And that's the thing, that's one of the things that is so perverse, because you can't suddenly switch that thought off. Oh, but if I do it when I'm in marriage, that doesn't
Yeah,
apply. I won't
but
be
you have to
the one who
understand.
gets trampled
You
and
have to
smashed.
understand that's not a flaw in the system.
It's a
That's the purpose of
design.
the system, right? Because you have to understand what that is telling a woman is that once you've got married and your husband and you have sex, no other man will want you. So your husband doesn't have to control his animalistic desires. And, if he says, some other woman, she tempted me, you have to forgive him. You
Yeah, I
can't
do.
leave because you've already had sex, so nobody else will want you. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the purpose of the system, to
Yeah.
control.
I mean, the amount of women that talk about the fact that sex, they kept themselves, they did all the right things, and then they had sex and it was awful and it was painful and it was just horrible and they never wanted to do it again. And then when they go through therapy and they work with great sex therapists, etc., the overriding feedback for those women is purity culture has literally damaged you as a person. It's damaged your ability to function as a woman. It's damaged your ability to function in a sexual way healthily, because you have all of this bias, all of this built up hatred for yourself just running in your head, not thinking that all you are is a damaged flower, rose, piece of paper, whatever, and you aren't property. And I think about, when we talk about this as it pertains to how we parent, bringing it back to that original thing, constantly telling your child that she's wearing short shorts, she can't wear short shorts, short shorts are out of order, what boy is going to look at you, blah, blah, blah. What's the short shorts got to do with the price of bread? She can't have her midriff out, she can't sit near her uncle. Why are we not killing the uncles, no disrespect, that are pedophiles within our community? Why are we letting them roam free, but we are locking up all the little girls and telling them it's their fault? How insane is the thought that the criminal gets to wander around stealing all the time with no consequence, but it's like the candy has to lock itself up? What? That don't make no sense. Anyway, continue on. Sorry. The
No,
subject upsets me. I'm going to
look,
try.
I think one of the other things that purity culture does is that it is or one of the other aspects of purity culture is that it is very much dependent on gender normatives.
Mm. Mm.
And this is dangerous and unhealthy
Mm.
for people. Because one of the things it says is that men are to lead and take responsibility for women, and women, you are to lead and be led. Sorry, you are
Submit.
not to lead, you are to be led.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that occurs in, what if this man just is not good at leading,
Leading is a whole gift in and of itself. Well, he don't have it.
right? The other thing it does is in regards to the gender normatives is, what if this man just doesn't want to lead? Well, purity culture is also toxic for him because it's telling him how you feel, what you want, and who you are is not normal, not right, not natural.
Yeah.
And so you have then men who would just be like, I'm okay. I don't want to lead. It's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility. Why would I want to? I'm happy to just go along with things. what it does is it forces them into a position that they don't want to be in, and that is then toxic because, 1, they don't have the skill set to do it.
Nope.
2, they're not emotionally equipped to do it. And then what happens is you end up frustrated. And then what happens to frustration at some point? Because one of the things that you're told is, as a man, you can't go express your emotions in the certain ways. What do you mean you're going to a therapist?
No, you're only allowed to be violent and angry. That's it. Those are your options. Be violent and be angry. I mean, in the context of parenting and relationships, it's a recipe for disaster. It's literally a recipe. He's not allowed to go to therapy. He's not allowed to seek a healthy outlet for his frustration. He's not allowed to actually tell his wife, you know what, even between us, you do this stuff because you're better at it than me, and I'll do this because then you're not being a man and everyone will look down on him and blah, 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 blah. And he needs to inflate his ego
But
up and he needs to do
but
that.
more than
Toxicity.
that,
You're
more
looking for
than that,
violence.
his wife has been conditioned to look down on him should he do that.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is no safe space for him to do that.
No. No. And oh, anyway. Go on. You make some more points. I'll try and hold my tongue.
No, no, go for it.
No, no, just make your points.
Yeah, so, I've forgotten where I was now. Anyway, uh, let's move on. Or to come back to the meme that we were talking about in the beginning in regards to, purity culture, um, and one of the points in the and children, and one of the points in the meme said that, a child was not to sit on their uncle's lap. What that does, or to sit on a man's lap, what that does is it finds its roots in the concept in purity culture that men are animalistic and cannot control themselves.
Yeah.
And you see that not just within that meme, but you see that actually anecdotally in child abuse cases where the abuser turns around and says, "But she tempted me."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Children
And
don't tempt.
so even that mindset
Mm,
is present within the man because
yeah.
what he's saying is, this child,
Yeah.
because she is female, tempted me, the adult, the one who should be responsible, the one who should know better.
Mhm.
But I've been taught and conditioned, no, that's not my
Creative.
responsibility. That's not my place to take
Yeah.
responsibility for that. And the other thing is that it teaches children from a young age that men are not a safe space for them,
Yeah.
and that is irrespective of gender,
Yeah.
right? So that means then that when you grow up and you have dysfunctional relationships between parents, or sorry, between children and fathers, where children do not feel safe to talk,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
converse, or have these really close, intimate relationships with their fathers, you have to understand that a lot of this is finding itself in roots of things that they were taught as children.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. Very much so. I think here's one of the things that I find to be very challenging. So of course, when we're talking about particularly like this meme, when we're talking about purity culture, a lot of people will then say the bite back is, yeah, but I want to keep my child safe. There are predators out there. There are people who snatch children. The statistics out of the United States are shocking about the amount of children that go missing. The rest of the world don't have statistics like them, so we have other statistics that we deal with, but that the cases of abuse still exist. And I would simply ask this: how has purity culture helped or stopped any of that? Has it? The answer is no. It actually leaves the person more vulnerable to the abuse. And it leaves them more vulnerable to the abuse because they're not taught how to spot the signs of actual danger. They don't know. Just every man is a danger. Every man can't control themselves. Every man, blah, 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 blah. So at no point can I discern between, as a child or as a woman or as a young lady or as an adult woman, I'm not taught the skills of discerning. And I'm also not taught how my community discerns in their behavior. So what happens is the parents aren't taking responsibility and refusing to have uncle so and so at the party because he's a paedophile and we should not have him around children and we should have reported him at the very least, or at least exclude him from the family life. They're not doing that. Adults are not being safe. Parents are not being safe spaces. I'm told that the men are not safe spaces. So when somebody approaches me who is grooming, who is actually following those tactics to lower my boundaries and to then cross that boundary, I am not equipped to deal with it at all. The cases of abuse don't go down with purity culture. In fact, we could argue that in certain instances, they go up. And the reason for that is because you have no equipment to deal with the problems that pedophiles, that rapists present to the individual. You're not taught how to say no safely. You're not taught how to spot the signs of somebody who's walking over your boundaries. You're not explained to how adults are responsible for adult behavior. You're told that everything is your fault. And you're told to feel ashamed of yourself. And it's shame that covers it all, and guilt. And that eats up the child or the young woman or the young man in that case. But you're not given the equipment to deal with any of this.
Look, I mean, purity culture, this is, yeah. Purity culture, I guess, in many ways, in what you're saying, and I do agree with it, is if you, yeah, I'm just gonna put it. It's how to make a racist. It's an introductory course on how to make a rapist by saying, men aren't responsible, by not teaching women how to discern, um, who is a danger and who is a threat. It creates an excuse for the rapist by telling women, look, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Did you lead him on? And the reality is, we know it has nothing to do with what a woman was wearing.
No.
Right? Because here's the thing, in terms of purity culture, if the Queen of England was to walk down the street naked, ain't a person gonna touch her.
Not a blessed one.
Right? So when you're talking about the concept that men can't control themselves, well, clearly it's not true.
Well, yeah, as I say, I think for this intersectionality conversation, it's obvious that purity culture doesn't work and is detrimental to the human development of both men and women. It stunts their growth and development. It stunts men completely, leaves them in some sort of phase of adolescent foolishness, headed up by hormones and who knows what other nonsense that they're trying to get to. And as a young person, I think I remember thinking to myself, why is it that men are supposed to be this intersectionality of head of household and patriarchy, and they're supposed to they can't even control what their willy does. Like, how are you responsible for anything if you can't control your own physical faculties? Is beyond me. I'm supposed to defer to you as a man. And that began to set into me as the older I got. I began to realize this quandary that I was being put in and placed in as a young person didn't actually make sense. But it stunts the man's growth. It doesn't allow as a man to grow emotionally, to grow responsibly, to grow into, a holistic person. And on the flip side of that, of course, it damages the woman. She is completely left incapable of doing anything, because no matter how she dresses, how she looks, what she does, she has to constantly defer and
Yeah.
make herself less than, and everything she does, it's her fault anyway.
look, it definitely does not promote healthy relationships between men and women. That is for sure. Because to a man, the purity culture teaches you that a woman's body is something that is dangerous to you. And as a woman, you are taught that your body is a weapon to a man.
Mm. Let me just
You are
pop in here
not.
quickly with this. Janelle, thank you so much for your feedback. I will look at the Facebook share link and see if I can work out why it isn't shareable. But I'll have a look at it later. But thank you for following along.
Yeah, so it's yeah, it doesn't promote a healthy body image, self image,
Yeah,
right? Because you're always going to be having these questions and wrestling with these concepts.
yeah.
What happens now when you're married?
It's a I'm trying to find a polite way of saying it's a complete mess.
It is a complete mess, but it's also
Yes. But you get
when
so
you but
things that
when you
are like
factor but when you factor in the concept that purity culture teaches um men and women that women are the property of their husband, or it objectifies them. You
yeah,
then have, when you couple this with the concept that now a woman's body is a threat or danger, you have the concept now of control coming in. I must dominate what is a threat to me.
yeah,
And within that, you then have statements, or this is what leads to statements by Burnett. Um, what's his
the
name now?
pastor who's the doctor, Burnett
Robinson.
Robinson, who said that
That the
rape
best
is not
person for a man to rape is his wife,
I mean, there are other people, but the best one.
right? But it's this sort of thing that leads to these pronouncements and these statements. And
Yeah,
a lot of people looking at purity culture on the surface might not necessarily see the dangers in it, and that's how insidious it is.
yeah,
Because you come at it like, oh, you're trying to promote, people not to be sleeping around because of, sexually transmitted infections, um, teenage pregnancy rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're not actually helping any of that. And the
yeah,
reality is, because you are not, the purity culture does not promote, even if you wanted to promote the abstinence in this way, the fact that you are not also promoting education on the subject, because you say, no, we don't need education because we're not doing it, because you're not um, promoting education. Then the problem with that is that when young people do find themselves in these situations, they don't know how to react or how to cope.
no, no. And you find that, of course, this affects mental well-being. It affects the way that people then develop different mental health issues. And the cycle is endless. And I think that as we're talking about parents, I think that the way this impacts your ability to parent is actually really startling. The responsibility of my child's safety is mine. My child is a child. They don't have the responsibility in the same way. Yes, of course, don't put your fingers in an electric socket if you know that you're not supposed to do that, of course. But they're children. They're not supposed to take responsibility for an adult human's criminal behavior. It is our responsibility as a society and as parents to hold those people to account and ensure that they are locked up, not to tell our children that it is their responsibility to dress differently. And I'll put it to you like this. We, a few years ago, we're both grown up in a Christian background, Christian homes, what have you. We span different cultures. And we would say we're fairly, we know kind of how Christian societies kind of work. But do you remember when we went to Finland and we were working at the camp, and we kind of arrived at the camp and we were like, "Oh, this is great." We're at this
Mhm.
all age camp. And one of the first things that we noticed is that the way that the young people were dressed would never have happened where we were. And we were surprised to see the freedom that these children were enjoying to just put on a vest and t-shirt and run out of the doors and go and play and hang out with their friends, and no one said anything, no one batted an eyelash. There was no innuendo around the young girls. They were everybody just put their vest in. It was hot. It was hot like fire. And there were mosquitoes everywhere. They put their vest and their t-shirt on and they went about their business without anything. And I remember us both having this conversation that said, isn't it amazing how you can step into someone else's culture and suddenly the things about your culture seem quite startlingly different? Like, hold on, why is it that our children can't do that? Why is it that our children are so sexualized that they can't put on a vest and a t-shirt on a hot day and go outside at camp, which should be a perfectly safe environment? Oh, it's not safe. Why is it not safe? It's not safe because we're holding them, purity culture. They have to abstain and they have to. No, it's not safe because we are not holding each other accountable as adults. We're the ones who are not holding the account to the other adults and saying, if you suspect somebody on here is like that, we need to go deal with that. Instead, we tell the children to cover up and they can't do, and it's their fault, and it's the girl's fault because she's wearing blah blah blah. She wore a vest and a t-shirt.
Look,
Ridiculous.
I come from a small island, and all I can say is, look, if you mess with my child, one, my child has been told to cut you, and two, I gonna come find you, put a cement block on your foot, and toss you overboard.
But you see, I
Because
think that this is where people don't realize how the impact of purity culture has impacted their parenting, because it is in the way that I growing up was told you'd never sit on an uncle's lap. And I look at my children and how freely they ramp with their uncles and they play. And I look at that freedom and I think I was never afforded that. I would never ever have ramped and played and run up and cuddled my uncle like that and jumped on him. I would never have had that freedom because as a child I was taught that my uncles were dangerous, that men were dangerous. And I, as a little girl, was never allowed the freedom to be a child and have a safe interaction and understand what safe touch is, what safe connection is, what a safe, loving environment is. I was denied all of that. And I know that many people within purity culture were completely denied that because the threat of men is so big that you cannot let your guard down. You must dress appropriately and you must never, if you touch them the wrong way, the man is going to be set off like he's some sort of ticking time bomb. And I look at the generations coming up and I would hope that as parents, we are examining the ideas that purity culture taught us so that we are not perpetuating that on our children.
yeah, look, I said we've had this conversation in regards that we were raised quite differently in respects to relationships with family and nudity and the human body. We were raised quite differently. But one of the things that we were taught and that was impressed upon us was this concept of responsibility for ourselves and for each other.
Mm.
So when I say these things about, look, I'm going to tie a concrete block to your feet and toss you overboard, it's because I recognize that coming from a black community, we don't trust the police within our communities
Right.
because of the harm that they have done. The problem with that is that we, in turn, have failed to police our communities.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, look, you can't have people like that running around. It's either you're going to tell the police come into the community, or you have to do something about it yourself,
Yeah.
right? Um, yeah, for me, I just see the abdication of responsibility of a community in dealing with these things, and the fact that the meme exists and can get so much support speaks to the amount of hurt within the community on
Yeah.
the subject,
Yeah.
right? And I
There's
think
so much
that
damage.
needs to be recognized,
Yeah.
that there is a lot of hurt out there.
Yeah.
But what also has to be recognized is that the meme and what it's teaching you is what you've been taught for years, and
Mm.
this is still the situation in which you find yourself.
Yep.
You have to do something differently.
Yep. Purity culture has not worked. It has not kept our family safe. It has not kept women safe. It has not allowed men to develop properly. And therefore, we have to do something differently. We have to consciously make an effort to learn and to parent and to talk about openly these things so that we can have progress and so that those who are predators and criminals are treated as such and the rest of us can get on with our lives safely, because there's some minority of people who are like that. To allow that to dictate the entire course of your parenting experience or your life is just not good. It's not good at all. Can't say that any other way. Right, well, we've run over a little bit because the subject was interesting and so many of you have joined us, and we're really thankful for that. Do you have any final kind of words or summations that you'd like to give on the subject?
Um, no, as I said, we just need to start doing things differently. We need to start taking responsibility for our communities um, and our children. You know, yeah, yeah, I just look for me. I just cannot imagine somebody doing something to one of my children, and I'm just like, oh, that's Uncle so and so. He's like that. No, no. There's gonna be repercussions to your actions. And I
Yeah,
don't care how close a family member you are, you know, there's gonna be repercussions for your actions.
yeah. And I think that that's something that we have to then think about. So for me, the kind of summary of this would be the things that we teach, particularly our girls and boys, well, teach our girls and our boys about their body, about their space, about their ability to say no, about how they should be respected, about how they can identify threats for themselves, about how they can have autonomy over their own body, is so important that we need to assess the messages that we're giving to the children. You know, you grew up, or I grew up, or we grew up thinking a certain way about ourselves, our bodies, and what we were responsible for. My husband's really great at telling me I always take responsibility for things that aren't my responsibility. But I've had a lifetime of being told that as a woman, everything is my responsibility. It's all my fault. Everything that's happened is my fault. And therefore, when I talk to my daughter, when I talk to my sons, I want to have a different conversation with them. I want them to experience the world differently. In order to do that, I, as the adult, am going to have to do the work. So my hope is that this is just the starting point of a conversation. This was just to give you some background, to give you some ideas about how this impacts. This is the dark side. We like to educate you a little bit, but how purity culture impacts so many different aspects of our life, including parenting. But it means that we have work to do as adults. We've got work to do to unpack some of the ways that these ideologies have impacted us so that we do not perpetrate them on the next generation. So the next generation of little boys grow up knowing that it's okay to talk about their emotions, and that it's okay to go to therapy, and it's okay to work within their gifted areas, and it's okay to take responsibility for their body, and they aren't just animals. And the next generation of little girls grow up knowing that they're amazing and that they're not responsible for someone else's criminal behavior. They're not responsible for someone else's thoughts. That all they can do is take responsibility for themselves and walk forward in life feeling confident that they are making one foot in front of the another steps. And I think that that's what I would want them to get out of that.
Just one other thing that I want to say is that there might be people that will see this and will think that we're talking nonsense because they've bought into the purity culture. Well, I would say this to you, that if this is something you believe, then you must ask yourself why you will believe something that is so heretical to the concept of Christianity. When we believe that salvation comes from God, then the only source of purity is the sacrifice of Christ.
Amen.
Therefore, purity cannot be found in whether a person is a virgin or not, whether a person has sex before marriage or not.
Mm-hmm.
It can only be found in the sacrifice of Christ and for us and our lives. So you must ask yourself, why are you so willing to believe something that is heretical to the very essence of Christianity?
And on that note, we thank you for joining us. We thank you for being with us. Please do like, subscribe, and share. Someone has said that the YouTube link isn't Facebook sharing. I will double check that and make sure that you can share that today. If not, it might be a bug at YouTube's end, but it should have all the permissions. Thank you so much. As always, it's a lively discussion. Mr. Storm, we enjoy the education you bring each week. It's always good. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We wish you a peaceful week ahead. God bless you, and we will see you next week for another edition of The Dark Side, where we'll be talking about something else. If you have a suggestion, please do pop that in the comment section, and we will let you know. Thank you so much for all of your positive feedback. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate you joining in the conversation. Please like, subscribe, and share so that you can join us every week on The Dark Side, 9 o'clock Central European Time on a Sunday. Yeah. Peace out.
Deuces.
Now I've got to find the end music to make sure I get it all done.